Children and It by Nesbit, Chapter 3, Being Wanted. The morning after the children had been the possessors of boundless wealth, and had been unable to buy anything really useful or enjoyable with it, except for 2 pairs of cotton gloves and a pony cart ride, they awoke without any of the enthusiastic happiness which they had felt on the previous day, when they remembered that they had had the luck to find the Samiade, or sand fairy, and to receive its promise to grant them a new wish every day. For now they'd had 2 wishes, beauty and wealth, and neither had exactly made them happy. But the happenings of strange things, even if they're not completely pleasant things, are more amusing than those times when nothing happens but meals. And they're not always completely pleasant, especially on days when it's cold mutton or hash. There was no chance of talking things over before breakfast because everyone overslept themselves, and it took a vigorous determination to get dressed and be downstairs for breakfast only 10 minutes late. During the meal, some efforts were made to deal with the question of the Samiade, but it's very difficult to discuss anything thoroughly and at the same time attend faithfully to the breakfast needs of your baby brother. The baby was particularly lively this morning. He not only wiggled his little body through the bar of his high chair, hanging by his head and choking, but he also managed to grab a tablespoon, with deliberate suddenness hit Cyril heavily in the head with it, and then cried because it had been taken away from him. He put his fat fist in his bread and milk and demanded cake, which was only allowed at tea. He sang and put his feet on the table. He clamored to go walkie, and the conversation went something like this. "Look here, about the sand fairy. Oh, look out, he'll have the milk over." Milk removed to a safe distance. "Yes, about the fairy. No, lamb dear, give Anthea the knocky spoon." Then Cyril tried. "Nothing we've had yet has turned out." "He nearly had the mustard over that time." "Oh, now you've done it, my boy." And in a flash of glass and baby paws, the bowl with the carp in it in the middle of the table rolled on its side and poured a flood of water and goldfish onto baby's lap and the laps of all the others. Everyone was almost as upset as the goldfish. Only the lamb remained calm. When the pool on the floor had been mopped up and the gasping goldfish had been collected and put back in the water, and baby taken away to be redressed by Martha, and most of the others had to change completely, the pinafores and jackets that had been bathed in goldfish water were hung out to dry. And then it turned out that Jane must either mend the dress she had worn the day before, or appear all day in her very best petticoat. It was white and soft and frilly, and trimmed with lace, and very, very pretty. Almost as pretty as a frock, if not more so. Only it was not a frock, and Martha's word was law. She would not allow Jane to wear her best frock as a dress, and refused to listen to Robert's suggestion otherwise. "It's not respectable," she said, and when people say that, it's no use trying to argue any different. You will find this out for yourself one day. So there was nothing for it but for Jane to mend her frock. The hole had been torn the day before, when she happened to tumble down the high street of Rochester. The others were not such sneaks as to abandon a comrade in misfortune, so they all sat on the grassy plain out by the sundial, while Jane darned for dear life. The lamb was still in the hands of Martha, having his clothes changed, so conversation was finally possible. Anthea and Robert timidly tried to conceal their inmost thoughts, which was that the Samiade was not to be trusted. But Cyril said, "Speak up now, say what you've got to say. I hate hinting and don't knowing and sneaky ways like that." So Robert was honor-bound to answer.
"Look here, Anthea and I weren't as goldfishy as you two, so we got changed quicker, and we came to think it over, and if you ask me—"
"Well, I didn't ask you," said Jane, biting off a needle full of thread, as she was always strictly forbidden to do. Perhaps you don't know, but if you bite off the ends of cotton thread and swallow them, they wind around your heart and kill you. At least that's what my nurse told me. But then she also told me the bit about the earth going around the sun. So what am I to believe?"
"I don't care who asks or who doesn't," said Robert. "Anthea and I think that the Samiade is a spiteful brute. If it can give us wishes, I suppose it can give itself its own. And I feel almost sure it wishes every time that our wishes don't come out as good. Let's just let the tiresome thing be and go have a jolly good time playing forts at the chalk pit.
You will remember that this house is happily situated between the quarry pit and the chalk pit. Cyril and Jane were most hopeful. They generally were. I don't think the Samier does it on purpose, Cyril said. And after all, it was silly to wish for boundless wealth. £50 in 2-shilling notes would have been much more sensible. And wishing to be beautiful as the day, well, that was just simply stupid. I don't mean to be disagreeable, but it really was. We must try to find something really useful and wish for that. Jane dropped her work and said, I think so too. It's too silly to have a chance like this and not use it. I never heard of anyone outside of a storybook who had such a chance. There must simply be heaps and heaps of things we could wish for that wouldn't turn all rubbish, like these two have. Oh, do let's think really hard and wish for something nice so that we can have a jolly good day. At least there is what's left of it. Jane darned away again like mad, for time was indeed getting on, and everyone began to talk at once. If you had been there, you couldn't possibly have made heads or tails of it, but these children were used to talking by fours, and so they were quite comfortable listening to the sounds of their brothers and sisters, and also speaking their own voice at the same time. This is a good example of multiplication by fractions. But I won't ask you to tell me what fraction of an ear each child was giving the other, for I believe that would be too instructive. Just believe me that the children could make sense of it. When the frock was darned, and they were ready to start for the gravel pit, Martha insisted everyone come inside and wash their hands before they go off to play. During the conversation, in which 6 ears were lent, there were 4 children, so that sum comes out right. It had been decided that £50 and 2 shillings was the right wish to have, and the lucky children, who could have anything in the whole wide world just by wishing it, hurriedly started for the gravel pit, when Martha caught them at the gate and insisted that they take baby with them. Not want him, indeed. Why, everybody want him, the little duck. With all their hearts they would. And you know the promise you made to your ma to take him out every day?
I know we did,
said Robert gloomily.
but I wish the lamb weren't quite so young and small. It would have been so much more fun taking him out if he could walk on his own.
He'll mend of his youngness in time, said Martha. And as for his smallness, I don't think he'd fancy carrying him any more, however big he is. Besides, he can walk a bit. Bless his precious fat little legs, the lamb. He feels the benefit of this country air, doesn't he? And with this and a kiss, she pushed Lamb into Anthea's arms and went back to making new pinafores on the sewing machine, of which she was an expert in. The lamb laughed with pleasure and said, Walkie, walkie with Anthea, and rode on Robert's back with yells of yips and joys, and tried to feed Jane a stone, and altogether made himself so agreeable that nobody could long be sorry that he was in the party. Enthusiastic Jane even suggested that they should devote a week's worth of wishes to ensuring the baby's future by asking for such gifts as good fairies give the infant princes in all the good little fairy tales. But Anthea soberly reminded her that the sand fairies' wishes only last until sunset, and so they could not really use them to ensure the baby's later years. And Jane owned that it would be better to wish for £50 in 2-shilling notes and buy the baby a nice rocking horse. It was settled then, and as soon as they wished for the money and got it, that they would go to Mr. Crispin and have them drive them to Rochester again. They would even take Martha if she insisted on going. And they would make a list of all the things that they wanted before they started off. Full of high hopes and excellent resolutions, they went round the safe, slow way by the cart road into the gravel pit, and then they stopped. For now they remembered that yesterday, when they had asked the Samiade for boundless wealth, and it was getting ready to fill the quarry with the minted gold of bright guineas, millions of them, it had told the children to run along outside the quarry for fear that they should be buried alive. And they had run. And so it happened that they had not had time to mark the spot where the Samiade was, as they had before. Never mind, said Jane hopefully. We'll soon find him. But this, though easily said, is hard in the doing. They looked, and though they found their seaside spades, they could not find the sand fairy. At last they sat down to have a rest, not at all because they were weary or disheartened, of course, but because the lamb had insisted on being put down, and you cannot very well carefully look for something in the sand while looking after an active baby at the same time. If you doubt me, get someone to drop your best knife in the sand next time you go to the seaside, and take your baby brother with you when you go to look for it, and you will see that I am right. The lamb, as Martha had said, was feeling the benefit of the country air, and he was as frisky as a grasshopper. The elder ones longed to go on talking about the new wishes they would have, if they ever found the Psammead again, but the lamb was thoroughly enjoying himself. He watched his opportunity and threw a handful of sand in Anthea's face, and then suddenly burrowed his head into the sand and waved his fat little legs in the air. But then, of course, the sand got into his eyes, as it had Anthea's, and he began to howl. Robert had brought along 1 bottle of ginger beer with him, relying on a thirst that had never yet failed him. This had to be quickly uncorked, as it was the only wet thing within reach, in order to wash out Lamb's eyes. Of course, the ginger hurt horribly, and he howled more than ever, and amid his anguished kicks, the bottle was upset, and the beautiful ginger beer frothed out into the sand and was lost forever. It was then that Robert, a usually very patient brother, and very forgiving, said to himself,
Anybody would want him indeed. Only they don't. Martha doesn't, not really, or she jolly well would have kept him with her. He's a little nuisance, that's what he is. It's too bad.
I only wish everybody did want him with all their hearts. Then we might be rid of him. Then there was silence. Robert was not proud of himself for having been so cross, and the others were not proud of him either. You often notice that sort of silence when someone has said something wicked, and everyone holds their tongues and waits for the person who oughtn't to have said something to say that they were sorry. The silence was broken by a sigh. A breath suddenly let out, and the children's heads turned as if there had been strings tied to the tip of their noses, and someone pulled all the strings at once, and everyone saw the sand fairy sitting quietly.
Good morning,
it said.
I did that quite easily. Everybody wants him now.
It doesn't matter, said Robert sulkily, because he knew he had behaved rather piggishly.
No matter who wants him. There's no one here anyway. Ingratitude, said the Psammead, is a dreadful vice.
It's not that we're not ungrateful, Jane said hastily, but we didn't really want to wish for that. Robert only just said it. Can't you take it back and give us another one?
No, I can't, said the Sand Fairy. Chopping and changing things around, that's not how things are done. You ought to be careful with what you do wish for. There once was a little boy. He wished for a Peleosaurus instead of an Ichthyosaurus because he was too lazy to remember the names of everyday things. And his father was very mad at him and made him go to bed before supper. And his father wouldn't let him go on the boat trip with his friends the next day, and he came and flung himself down near me in the morning, and he kicked his little prehistoric legs and said he wished he was dead, and so he was.
How awful, said the children all together.
It was only until sunset, of course,
the Psammead said.
Still, it quite upset his father and mother, and he got in big trouble when he finally woke up and went home, let me tell you. He didn't turn to stone. I don't remember why, but there must have been some reason for it. And his parents wouldn't let him eat Magatherum for a week.
All the children were quite crushed by this terrible tale. They looked at the Psammead in horror. Suddenly, the lamb perceived something brown and fat and furry was near him. Pussycat, he said, and made a grab. That's not a pussycat, Anthea had begun, when the Sand Fairy leapt back.
Oh, my left whisker, it said. Don't let him touch me, he's wet.
Its fur stood on end in horror, and indeed a good deal of ginger beer had been spilled on Lamb, and he was still rather wet. The Psammead dug with his hands and feet vigorously, and in the swirl of sand he was gone. The children marked the spot with a ring of stones.
We may as well take him home,
said Robert.
I'll say I'm sorry, but anyway, it's no good. The harm has been done. And at least we know where the sand thing is for tomorrow.
The others were noble. No one reproached Robert at all. Cyril picked up the lamb, who was quieting himself again, and they went back by the road. The cart road from the gravel pit joined the main road directly, and at the gate of the road, the party stopped to shift the lamb from Cyril's back to Robert's. And as they paused, a very smart-looking carriage came into sight, with a coachman and a groom and a fine lady inside. Dressed all in white lace and red ribbons, she had a parcel with red and white, and a fluffy little dog in her lap, with a red ribbon around its neck. She looked at the children, and she looked at baby and smiled. The children were used to this, for the lamb was, as all the servants said, a very pretty little child. So they waved their hands politely at the lady and expected her to drive on, but she did not. Indeed, she made the coachman stop and beckoned the children to come near.
"What a dear, darling little baby! Oh, I should very much like to adopt it. Do you think its mother would mind?"
"She would very much indeed," said Anthea.
"Oh, but I shall bring him up in luxury, you know. I am Lady Chatterton. You must have seen my photograph in the illustrated papers. They call me a great beauty, you know. But, of course, that's all nonsense anyway."
She opened the carriage door and jumped out. She had a wonderful high-heeled shoes with silver buckles.
"Oh, let me hold him just a moment."
And she took the lamb and held him very awkwardly, and it was obvious she had never held a baby before. Then suddenly she jumped into the carriage with the baby in her arms, shut the door and said, "Drive on!" The lamb roared, and the little dog barked, and the coachman hesitated.
"Drive on, I tell you!"
cried the lady, and the coachman did. For as he said afterwards, it was his place. The 4 children looked at each other, and then with one accord they rushed after the carriage and held on behind it. Down the dusty road went the smart little carriage, and after that, at double time quick, ran the twinkling legs of Lamb's brothers and sisters. The lamb howled louder and louder, but presently his howls changed by slow degree to hiccuping gurgles, and then he fell asleep. The carriage went on, and the 8 feet that twinkled through the dust behind were growing quite stiff and tired before the carriage finally stopped at the lodging of a Grand Park hotel. The children crouched down behind the carriage as the lady got out. She looked at the baby asleep in the carriage and hesitated.
"The darling, I won't disturb him."
And she went into the hotel. The coachman and the footman sprang from the box and leaned over to look at the sleeping lamb.
"Fine boy, wish he were mine," said the coachman.
"He wouldn't favor you much," said the groom. "Too handsome."
The coachman pretended not to hear and said,
"Wonder at her now.
I really do. Hates kids, got none of her own, and can't abide other folks's." The children crouched in the white dust under the carriage and exchanged an uncomfortable glance. "I'll tell you what," said the coachman firmly. "I've a mind to hide the little nipper in the hedge and tell her his brothers took him, and then I'll come back for him afterwards."
"Oh, no, you don't," said the footman. "I've taken to that kid. If anyone's to have him, it should be me, so there."
"Stow your gab," said the coachman. "You don't want no kids, and if you did, one kid's the same as to you as any other. I'm a married man, and I know a good nipper when I see one. So I'll see to him."
"I should have thought," said the footman, sneering, "you'd had enough kids. What with Alfred and Albert and Louise and Victor and Stanley and Helena and Beatrice and that other one."
The coachman hit the footman on his chin, and the footman hit the coachman in his waistcoat, and in the next minute they were fighting and tumbling up and down and this way and that way, everywhere, and the little dog jumped from the box and was barking like mad. Cyril, still crouched in the dust, waddled over with bent legs to the side of the carriage farthest from the battlefield. He opened the doors carefully, as the 2 men were too far away, occupied with their quarrel, to notice anything, took the lamb out into his arms, and crept away with the sleeping baby a dozen yards along the road and hid in the hedge. The others followed, and there among the hazel and oak and chestnut trees, they lay hidden until the angry voices of the men were hushed by the angry voice of the lady, and after a long and anxious search, and the carriage finally drove away. "My word," said Cyril, drawing a deep breath as the sound of the wheels died away. "Everyone does want him now, that's no mistake. That Sammy Aiden's done us again, tricky brute. For my sake, let's get this kid home safe." So they took courage, crept out from behind the hedge, and walked along the lonely road with Anthea carrying the sleeping baby. A boy, carrying a bundle of sticks on his back, dropped his bundle by the roadside and asked to look at the baby, and then offered to carry him for a bit. But Anthea was not to be caught that way twice. They all walked on, but the boy followed, until Cyril and Robert had to make him go away by inviting him to smell their fists. Afterwards, a little girl in a blue and white checked pinafore actually followed them for 1/4 of a mile, crying about the precious little baby. And then she was only gotten rid of by threats of tying her to a tree with their handkerchiefs so that the bears can come and eat you as soon as it's dark. And she went home crying. Presently, it seemed wise to the brothers and sisters of the baby, so precious he was wanted by everyone, to hide in the hedge whenever they saw someone coming along the road. And thus they managed to prevent Lamb from being wanted by the milkman, the stonemason, and a man who drove a cart. They were nearly home when the worst thing of all happened. Turning a corner, suddenly they came upon 2 caravans and a tent, a company of gypsies encamped by the side of the road. The vans were hung all around with chairs and cradles and flower stands and feather brushes. A lot of raggedy children were industriously making dust pies in the road. 2 men lay on the grass smoking, and 3 women were doing the family washing. In a moment, every gypsy man, woman, and child surrounded Anthea and the baby. "Let's hold him a little, miss," said the gypsy woman, who had mahogany-colored face and dust-colored hair. "I won't hurt a hair in his head. A little picture." "I'd rather not," said Anthea.
Let me have him,
said the other woman, whose face was also a hue of mahogany and her hair jet black in tight curls. "I've 19 of my own, you see. So I have." "No," said Anthea bravely, but her heart beat so that it nearly choked her. Then one of the men pushed forward. "Save me it is, me own long-lost child. Have he a strawberry mark on his left ear? No, why then for sure he's my babe, stolen in infancy. And we're reunited at last. Now hand him over, and I won't have the law on ya." He snatched the baby from Anthea, who turned scarlet, and the baby burst into tears. The others were standing quite still. This was much the most terrible thing that had ever happened. Even being taken by the policeman in Rochester was nothing to this. Cyril had grown quite white, and his hands trembled a little. But he made a sign to the others to keep silent as he started. "We don't want to keep him from you if he's yours. But you see, he's used to us. So you shall have him if you really want him." "No!" cried Anthea, and Cyril glared at her. "Of course we want him," said the women, trying to get the baby out of the man's arms, and the baby was howling loudly. "Oh, he's hurt," said Anthea, and Cyril savagely told her to stow it. "You trust me," he whispered. "Look here," he went on, "he's awfully tiresome with people he doesn't know very well. Suppose we stay here a bit until he gets used to you, and then at bedtime, I'll give you my word of honor, we'll go away, and let you keep him if you want him. And you can decide among yourselves who'll to have him." "That's fair enough," said the man holding baby, trying to loosen the neck scarf which baby had caught a hold of and was choking the man. The gypsies whispered to each other, and Cyril glanced at the others. "Sunset! We'll get away then." And his brothers and sisters were filled with wonderful admiration for him at having been so clever. "Oh, do let him come to us. See, we'll sit right down here and take care of him for you until he gets used to you."
"What about dinner?"
said Robert suddenly, and the others looked at him with scorn. "Fancy being about your beastly dinner when your the baby," Jane whispered, but Robert gave her a wink and went on.
"You don't mind if we just run home to get dinner, do you? I can bring it back here in a basket."
His brothers and sisters felt themselves very displeased with him, for they did not know his secret thought, but the gypsies did. "Oh, yes," they said, "and then you'll fetch a policeman and tell him that he's your baby instead of ours. Oh, you little weasel." "If you're hungry, you can eat with us," said the light-haired gypsy, not unkindly. "Give him to the little lady and see if he can't get her used to us a bit." So the lamb was handed back to Anthea, but the gypsies crowded so closely that he couldn't possibly stop howling. And then the man with the red handkerchief said, "Here, make up a fire, and you girls see to your pots. Give the kid a chance to breathe." So the gypsies, very much against their will, went off about their work, and the children and lamb were left sitting in the grass. "He'll be all right at sunset," Jane whispered. "Oh, but it is so awful. Suppose they're angry with us when they come to their senses. They might leave us tied to trees or something." "No, they won't," said Anthea. "Oh, Lamb, don't cry any more. It's all right. Anthea's got you. They aren't unkind people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be giving us dinner."
Dinner, said Robert. I don't want their nasty dinner. It would choke me.
The others thought so too then, but as they hadn't had any lunch, they were really quite hungry, and it was a good dinner, boiled rabbit with onions and carrots, and lots of other little things. Baby even consented to letting the two gypsy women feed him as he sat on Anthea's lap. All that long, hot afternoon, Robert and Cyril and Anthea and Jane had to keep Baby amused and happy while the gypsies looked on eagerly. By the time the shadows grew long and black across the meadow, he had really taken to the gypsy woman with the light hair, and even consented to a kiss. And he stood up and bowed like a real little gentleman to the two men. The whole gypsy camp was in rapture over him, and his brothers and sisters could not help taking pleasure showing off his little accomplishments to the astonishment of this crowd. But they longed for sunset. "We're getting into the habit of longing for sunset," Cyril whispered. "How I do wish we could wish something really sensible that would be of use, and then we should worry when sunset came." The shadows were growing longer and longer, and at last there were no separate shadows any more, but one soft, glowing shadow over everything, for the sun was nearly set behind the hill. But it had not truly set yet, but the gypsies were growing impatient. "Now, young'uns," said the red handkerchiefed man, "it's time you were laying your heads on your pillows. The kid's all right. He's right and friendly with us now. Now you just hand him over and go on like you said you would." The women and the children came crowding around the lamb with eager fingers to take him away. But all failed to tempt the loyal little lamb. He clung his arms and legs around Jane, who happened to be holding him at the time, and gave a roar any time someone tried to take him. "It's no good," said the woman. "Hand the little puppet over, miss. We'll soon quiet him." And still the sun would not set. "Tell him about putting him to bed," whispered Cyril. "Anything to gain more time. Oh, I hope the sun finally makes up its mind to set." "Yes, I'll hand him over in just a minute," said Anthea, beginning to talk very fast. "But do let me tell you about his warm bath every night and a cold bath in the morning, and little Samuel says his prayers with a little china doll, and he has a bath toys, and he hates for you to wash his ears, but you must do it, and if you let the soap get into his eyes, well then that lamb," he said.
Lamb keys,
he said, and stopped his roaring to listen. The woman laughed. "As if I had never bathed a baby before. Come on now, hand him over, little precious."
Go away, gypsy,
replied Lamb at once. "Yes, but," Anthea went on, "about his meals, you really must let me tell you. He gets an apple or a banana every morning for breakfast, and milk with his breakfast, and an egg for tea sometimes, and, I've brought up 10, said the woman, "besides the others. Now come on, miss." "Settled who's to have him yet, Esther," said one of the men. "It won't be you, Esther, with 7 of 'em at your tails anyway." "I ain't so sure of that," said Esther's husband. "And ain't I nobody to have a say either," said one of the other men. "Zillah," the girl said,
And me, I'm a single girl, and no one but myself to look after. I ought to have him. Hold your tongue. Shut your mouth. Don't you show me any more of your impatience. Everyone was getting very angry, and the gypsy faces were getting redder, and suddenly a change swept over them, as if an invisible sponge had wiped away all of the anxiety and crossness and left them completely blank. The children looked and saw that the sun had finally set, but they were afraid to move. The gypsies were feeling so muddled about having all of their feelings washed away in an instant. The children hardly dared to breathe. Suppose the gypsies were angry about how silly they had been acting all day. It was an awkward moment. Suddenly, Anthea, in great daring, held out Lamb to the red-handkerchiefed man. "Here he is," she said. The man drew back. "I shouldn't like to deprive you, miss," he said. "Anyone who likes to have him can have him," said the other man. "After all, I've got my own," said Esther. "He's a nice little chap," said Amelia, who was the only one who now looked affectionately at him. "I think I must have had a touch of the sun to have wanted him." "Then shall we take him away?" asked Anthea. "Well, suppose you do," said the man. "Now, we'll say no more about it." And with great haste, all of the gypsies began busying themselves to get ready for the night. All but Amelia. She went with the children as far as the bend in the road, where she said, "Let me kiss him good-bye, miss. I don't know what made me go so silly, but us gypsies don't really steal children, you know, whatever they may tell you when you're naughty. We've enough of our own, mostly. But I've lost all of mine now." She leaned towards Lamb, and he unexpectedly put a little soft paw on her face. "Poor, poor," said Lamb, and let the gypsy woman kiss him. And what's more, he kissed her cheek right back, a very nice little kiss, and not a big wet one like some babies give. The gypsy woman moved her finger around his forehead and said, "May he be brave, and have a strong head to think with, and a strong heart to love with, and strong hands to work with, and strong feet to travel with, and always come home safe to his own." And then she said something in a strange language no one understood. And suddenly she said, "Well, goodbye now. Glad to have made your acquaintance." And then she turned and went back to her home. The children looked after her until she was out of sight. Then Robert said,
How silly of her, even after sunset. Didn't put her right.
"Well," said Cyril, "if you ask me, I think it was rather decent of her." "Decent," said Anthea. "It was very nice indeed. I think she's a very nice lady." "She was too frightfully nice for anything," said Jane. And they went home, too late for tea and unspeakably late for dinner, and Martha scolded them most heartily. But the lamb was safe.
I say, it turned out we wanted Lamb just as much as anybody else.
"Of course, but do you feel any different for him now that the sun has set?" "No," said all of them together. "Then it lasted over sunset with us." "No, it hasn't," Cyril explained. "The wish didn't do anything to us. We wanted him all along. In our hearts, that is. We were just being silly this morning. Especially you, Robert." Robert bore this with much strange calmness.
I certainly was wrong this morning,
He said.
but everything looked so different when we thought we were going to lose him.
And that, dear children, is the moral of this chapter. I did not mean for it to have a moral, but morals are nasty little things that keep shoving their way into stories, especially stories for children. And since the moral has snuck in anyway, quite against my wishes, you might as well think of it next time you're feeling cross and you want to get rid of your brothers and sisters. I hope this doesn't happen to you often. But I dare say it will happen eventually. Yes, even to you.